Hello. Today we're going to look at the pros and cons of direct sowing and transplanting. Let's start with transplanting. So what is transplanting? Well, basically, in a sheltered place, such as a garage, a windowsill, or a greenhouse, we take little pots like this. They come in all sorts of sizes and shapes, and we fill them with soil and plant a little seeds in this. The plants grow to a certain size, and then later we plant them in the garden where we want them to grow definitively. So, what are the advantages to this system? Well, the first thing is we're not weather dependent. If we want to plant our little seeds, we can control indoors, i.e. in a greenhouse or on a windowsill or in a garage or some other contained space. We can control the growing conditions, the light, the heat and so on. So we're not dependent on the weather outside. So in the middle of winter we can start planting things which would normally only start to grow, well, the seeds would only start to germinate and grow later in the year, in the spring for example. So the advantage there is we can plant when we want, which means we can actually extend the growing season. For example, we can plant in winter, ready to plant out our little plants in spring. The other thing is the plants that we produce, because they're going to be not just seeds which are then going to produce very, very small seedlings, they're going to be of a certain size such that they can resist little pests or diseases or even competition from weeds around them, so they have possibly a better chance of surviving to adulthood. And the other thing is we can actually choose exactly where we want to plant them, because we know the plant is already formed, we know exactly where we can put it, whereas with seeds being, I say, spread here and there, we're not usually sure exactly where the plant's going to grow. So those are the advantages. So let's take a look at some of the disadvantages. There can be a lot of work with transplanting. Imagine we've got seeds that we put in our pots which we've already filled with soil. We need to tend them, water them, ensure that they're at the right temperature, they're in the right position, and this involves a certain amount of time and effort. Also, once they've grown to a certain size, we then have to plant them out in the garden where we want them to grow. Another consideration is cost. If we need to buy little pots, potting soil, we maybe have to heat the areas they're growing in, we may have invested in something like a greenhouse. This is all costly. So again, there's a financial consideration here. And also, if we don't look after our seeds correctly in these particular protected growing areas, we can have problems with certain fungal diseases and things like that, such as damping off disease, which means our little seedlings die, or they can become what I call leggy. They're trying to find a source of light. If you have a room which is not very well lit and there's a window, the seedlings will tend to grow towards it and actually produce these very, very thin and very weak stems, which makes it difficult to replant in the garden afterwards. So that's a few of the cons of transplanting. You can just buy ready grown plants at your garden centre, so you can avoid all of this work from getting the plant from the seed to a small plant. But again, there's a cost involved. Seeds are very, very cheap, whereas grown plants are quite a little bit more expensive. Let's compare direct sowing. So, as the name suggests, direct sowing is simply planting the seeds where you want the plants to grow. So we sow the seeds and cover them up and give them a water. Now, what are the advantages of direct sowing? Well, the first thing is the amount of work that's involved. We simply plant the seeds, cover them up, and as I said, possibly give them a good water and let them grow. And even the amount of watering we need to do may well be reduced because we can rely on things like rain to take care of the watering for us. The other thing is it's relatively cheap. Seeds are usually a lot less expensive than grown plants, and there's no real specialized equipment to purchase in addition to the normal gardening tools that you use all year round. We don't need to invest in a greenhouse, for example. The other thing is the plants that grow, the ones that survive, will be well established, have good root systems, and actually will be extremely resistant to diseases, pests and so on, because they are fully acclimatized to the place they're growing in. They haven't been grown somewhere else and then planted to grow in the garden. They've actually grown from seed in that particular place. Another thing to consider is that there are certain plants which can't really be transplanted. We can't really grow them in pots and then transplant them into the garden. I'll think of some examples. Some root vegetables such as carrots or turnips really can't be grown in pots and then transplanted into the garden. It just doesn't work. And other plants such as melons, for example, also don't like being transplanted. So for these plants we have no choice. We have to directly sow them in place. Now, let's have a look at some of the negative points. We've looked at some of the positive points, but what are the negative points? One thing is you tend to use a lot more seeds than maybe you would use when transplanting, because there's going to be quite a few losses. Small seedlings that grow from seeds are quite often prey to certain pests such as slugs and snails, for example. So there may be quite a few losses, so you may be using more seeds. Another thing is we're also very much weather dependent. We can't extend the season like we can do with transplanting. We have to wait until the weather conditions are good, such as the start of spring, for example, when it really is the right moment to plant the seeds. The air temperature is correct, the amount of sunlight is correct, the amount of rain is correct, and even the soil temperature is as it needs to be. So there are a few of the negative aspects of direct sowing. What is the better system, transplanting or direct sowing? Well, with transplanting, there's a lot of work. It's a little bit more expensive, but you know that you're going to get a good harvest of healthy plants at the end of the season. Direct sowing, there's more risk involved, but there's a lot less work and a lot less expense too. But again, we're not quite sure what is going to grow and in what quantity. So the two systems have their advantages and disadvantages, and you may decide to go with one or the other, or maybe do a mixture of both. So it's springtime, spring has arrived. Let's get on and do some transplanting or some direct sowing, or both.